Hello, dear friends. My name is Raisa Savchenko. I am a literature researcher and Holocaust historian from Ukraine. Our today's topic is Holocaust poetry, and we will try to define how right was Theodor Adorno with his famous line, "To write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric." The Holocaust turned out to be the unprecedented event in human history, and it is possible to suppose that this event affected the future ability of human beings to create such aesthetic things as poetry. Here, I am citing a bit larger passage from Adorno's essay of 1949, Cultural Criticism and Society. Cultural criticism finds itself faced with the final stage of the dialectic of culture and barbarism. To write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, and this corrodes even the knowledge of why it has become impossible to write poetry today. Adorno understood that what happened during the Shoah was an absolute deviation from the fundamental norms of civilization and civilized behavior. To be valid, anything written or said about the Holocaust, whether in poetry or prose, must first and foremost encapsulate and reflect its barbaric essence. When met with gaping abyss of the Shoah, even poetic language with all its possibilities of metaphor seems inadequate to speak the horrors of catastrophe and genocide. There were, of course, more than 3 people who managed to transmit the barbaric essence of the Holocaust in their poetry, but during this meeting we will concentrate only on the 3 persons: Dan Pagis, Paul Celan, and Nelly Sachs. All the 3 were Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. Paul Celan and Dan Pagis went through labor camps, and Nelly Sachs had a long time of exile in Sweden with her mother. Expressions of memory, individual and collective, shape the central questions for both poetry and philosophy in a post-World War II context. The ability to speak about the unspeakable. Poetry as the art of words plays a tremendously important role in this context. During this lecture, we will try to investigate how the 3 poets implemented their Holocaust experience in the poetic lines. The poetry in the Holocaust context is akin a cry of pain. So every of the 3 mentioned writers experienced its own pain, which found reflection in their poetry. The intertwining dialogue with history, memory, and trauma embodied in the poetry of Dan Pagis, Paul Celan, and Nelly Sachs features defining characteristics of Holocaust poetics that we are still grappling with today. So now I suggest you to answer the question and to find Dan Pagis on this slide. What picture is the picture of Dan Pagis? Please choose your variants. Okay, so the right variant is variant B. Here we see Dan Pagis on this picture. And now we will speak more about Dan Pagis' childhood and his way in the career. So Dan Pagis was born in 1930 in Radaus, Bukovina, Romania. His parents spoke German at home. He lost his mother at a young age. She died when he was only 4 years old. At the age of 11, Pagis was sent to a forced labor camp at Transnistria together with his grandfather, who unfortunately died during their captivity, leaving a young Pagis totally and utterly alone in the world. By 1946, the 16-year-old Pagis had survived the forced labor camp and immigrated to Palestine in order to be reunited with his father, who was working as a chemist at those times. Dan Pagis chose the Hebrew language as the language of his writings. He gained his PhD from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he later taught medieval literature. And today I'm going to bring to light 2 poems of Dan Pagis. Written in pencil in the sealed railway car is probably the most widely cited poem by Dan Pagis. It was published in 1970 in the publication Gilgul. The name Gilgul means transformation. It's from Hebrew. So here we see this poem written on the slide, and I will read it aloud. Here in this transport, I am Eve with Abel, my son. If you see my older son, Cain, son of man, tell him that I. One might observe that this poem is marked through short, clipped phrases, incomplete sentences, and ends with an ominous interruption. Firstly, of course, the poem represents Eve with her son Abel. Eve is the central figure, which is in Carlot, and she is together with her son Abel. This allusion immediately connotes the biblical story of Cain and Abel, where Cain commits the first murder, making his brother the first victim. We can say that here Abel embodies all that is good, righteous, and innocent. Dan Pagis himself, in one of his interviews in 1943, admitted, "I do feel like some sort of Abel figure." So this position is very close to the worldview of a survivor. The poem is composed as a tercet, which arranges 19 words in 6 lines. It's from original Hebrew. In original Hebrew version, it has 12 syllabi, 6 to 6 divided with a midpoint. In the first line, Eve is turning directly to the reader with the words, "If you see my older son," and later, "tell him that I." The shift to second person, you, forces the reader to become a part of and a witness to the poem events. By incorporating witnesses who are asked to carry forth her message, Eve's testimony coerces bystanders into engaging her voice. There is also an interesting fact about the word tell in the last line. It sounds like tagidu in Hebrew, and it makes allusion with the Job 38:4. Tell tagidu if you have understanding. So really, did 6 million martyred Jews have any understanding about the way which led them to death? It is a rhetorical question. Because all the letters written in pencil are lowercase, when the poem abruptly cuts off, the reader is forced back to the beginning again in an attempt to find closure. Effectually, this means that the poem is read and replayed in the manner of a memorial-style litany or refrain. And another poem which I want to bring to light today is Testimony. I will read it. No, no, of course they were human, uniforms, boots. How to explain it? They were created in the image. I was a shadow. I had a different maker, and he in his mercy left nothing in me to die. And I fled to him, rising so light, blue, appeased, I'd say apologetic, smoke to omnipotent smoke that has no body or form. The tone of the poem is a contained anger, and the theological question of presence or absence of God during the Holocaust is being addressed here. The first 4 lines represent the picture of the perpetrators. So, even the perversion of human behavior appears to be human in fact. The Nazis were also human, but the victims feel to be made by a different maker. At the same time, the mentioning of different maker negates the idea of one God, bringing us back to Babylonian times. In the 3rd and 4th line, we have reference to God. They were created in the image. And when spoken about Nazis, it sounds sarcastically. I was a shadow. I had a different maker. In these lines in Hebrew, there is a play of words, tselem, image, and tseled, shadow. So the victim or the survivor represents himself as a shadow made by a different maker. Pagis called the poem Testimony. And really, we usually hear testimonies in the court of law, where someone is always accused. Thus, the question remains open. Whom did Pagis accuse in his poem? How do you think? Who is accused? Please write your variants in the comments to this video. And now we are moving to Paul Celan figure, and I suggest you to answer also a question about the photo. On which photo is Paul Celan depicted? Please choose your variants, and we will see the right answer in some seconds. So, well, Paul Celan is the answer C. His true name was in fact Paul Anchel, and he was born on November 23rd in 1920 in Chernovitz, Bukovina, at the time Romania, today's Ukraine, to Jewish-speaking German family. In 1942, he lost his parents, who were taken from their home and sent to an internment camp in Transnistria. His father likely perished of typhus, and his mother was shot after being exhausted by the forced labor. Later, Celan himself was taken to the labor camp, and he was there until 1944. So there is the secret of his name. After World War II, he changed his name to the anagram Celan, which is the anagram from Anchel or Ansel. After liberation from the Romanian labor camp, the poet's life began to change professionally and privately. In 1950, Celan received his degree and became a lecturer of German language, and in 1952, he married artist Gisèle Lestrange. While living in Paris, Celan's verses began to show traces of French surrealism, and his poems became much more complex and poetic in structure, resembling dramatic realism. The poems contain the signs of labyrinths, and such elaborate poems become a marker of his artistic period that included the publication of Sprachgitter and Die Niemandsrose. The particular time in which he lived made it necessary for him to break with the conventional rules of poetry. In other words, the poem after Auschwitz is possible, but it cannot be a poem in the old manner. Its breadth is different. Celan always uses words that are very precisely related to their context and to the time in which the poet was living. Breath, atom in German, is an essential word for Celan, and the book title Atomwende, Press Turn refers to this change of breath necessary for new poetry. For example, in the poem Weggebeits vom Strahlenwind, we see the image of atom crystal, breath crystal, and the image of wind, which is also associated with Hebrew ruach, breath, wind, storm, and soft breath. Ruach appears to be the speaking spirit of God. This poetry could be called Die Hölderlinie die Moderne. Its name is after the name of the famous German Romanticism poet Johann Christian Friedrich Hölderlin. This poetry style comes from the existential situation where the poet is responsible for breaking the traditional rules. We can say that the poems by Celan are loaded with clang semantic, a semantic of sound. Part of the fascination of the poems is the tension between the often dark content and the semantics of sounds that awaken a magic power in the reader's soul, even if he does not understand the poem. In such a way, the poem is to be understood as a message in a bottle, a flushing post, that is perhaps washed ashore in the reader's heart. So the dialogue with the reader is also very important for Paul Celan. Das Fug is maybe the most famous poem by Celan, which tries to utter the horror of the Shoah. Such poem is not longer possible in Celan's later work, and we can say that he enjoyed very much the fame this poem brought him. I suggest you to listen to it in German original. to catch the moments of silence and the general spirit of the poem.
Todesfuge. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken sie abends, wir trinken sie mittags und morgens, wir trinken sie nachts, wir trinken und trinken. Wir schaufeln ein Grab in den Lüften, da liegt man nicht eng. Ein Mann wohnt im Haus, der spielt mit den Schlangen, der schreibt, wenn es dunkelt nach Deutschland, dein goldenes Haar, Margarete. Er schreibt es und tritt vor das Haus, und es blitzen die Sterne, er pfeift seine Rüden herbei, er pfeift seine Juden hervor, lässt schaufeln ein Grab in der Erde. Er befiehlt uns, spielt auf nun zum Tanz. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken dich nachts, wir trinken dich morgens und mittags, wir trinken dich abends, wir trinken und trinken. Ein Mann wohnt im Haus, der spielt mit den Schlangen, der schreibt, wenn es dunkelt nach Deutschland, dein goldenes Haar, Margarete, dein aschenes Haar, Sulamit. Wir schaufeln ein Grab in den Lüften, da liegt man nicht eng. Er ruft, stecht tiefer ins Erdreich, ihr einen, ihr andern spielt weiter zum Tanz auf. Er greift nach dem Eisen im Gurt, er schwingt's, seine Augen sind blau. Stecht tiefer die Spaten, ihr einen, ihr andern spielt weiter zum Tanz auf. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken dich nachts, wir trinken dich mittags und morgens, wir trinken dich abends, wir trinken und trinken. Ein Mann wohnt im Haus, dein goldenes Haar, Margarete, dein aschenes Haar, Sulamite, er spielt mit den Schlangen. Er ruft, spielt süßer den Tod, der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. Er ruft, streicht dunkler die Geigen, dann steigt ihr als Rauch in die Luft. Dann habt ihr ein Grab in den Wolken, da liegt man nicht eng. Schwarze Milch der Frühe, wir trinken dich nachts, wir trinken dich mittags, der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. Wir trinken dich abends und morgens, wir trinken und trinken. Der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland, sein Auge ist blau. Er trifft dich mit bleierner Kugel, er trifft dich genau. Ein Mann wohnt im Haus, dein goldenes Haar, Margarete. Er hetzt seine Rüden auf uns, er schenkt uns ein Grab in der Luft. Er spielt mit den Schlangen und träumet. Der Tod ist ein Meister aus Deutschland. Dein goldenes Haar, Margarete. Dein aschenes Haar, Sulamit.
Here we have the quotation from this poem in English. Black milk of daybreak, we drink it at evening, we drink it at midday and morning, we drink it at night, we drink and we drink, we shovel a grave in the air, there you won't lie too cramped. The death is represented in the poem as a master from Deutschland, master from Germany. It is the living death of those who suffered inside the concentration camps. Moreover, the theme of suffering is present throughout the poem. Each line says what a Jew was going through in such a horrific environment of the camp. Another passage from the death book. A man lives in the house he plays with his vipers, he writes, when it grows dark to Deutschland, you are golden hair, Margarita. He writes it and steps out of doors, and the stars are all sparkling. He whistles his hounds to come close. He whistles his Jews into rows, has them shovel a grave in the ground. He orders us strike up and play for the dance. The poem is full of repetitions, refrains, and alliterations, which help to support the poem's structure. The images of Margarita and Shulamit, the girls with blonde and ashen hair, probably the one German, Aryan, and another one Jewish, represent two sides of the existence during the World War II. Moreover, we can find the image probably of the commandant of the concentration camp who plays with the snakes and has blue eyes. There is one interesting quotation from the letter of Margaret Sussman to Paul Celan about the isolation of the writer. Perhaps Someone who speaks this new language necessarily must suffer and become isolated because he is so difficult to understand. This means that poetry contains that element of cuteness which you speak about in your Buchner speech. So writing the poetry after Auschwitz contained also this necessary element of silence or muteness. We can say that Nelly Sachs was one of the figures with whom Celan shared letters, having found unity in their views on the Shoah and the poetry. They enjoyed really close friendship. So moving to Nelly Sachs. Who on these pictures is Nelly Sachs? Please choose your variant and we will see in a few seconds the right answer. And here we are. The right answer is D. Here we see the photo of Nelly Sachs, and now we'll speak about a few facts of her biography. Nelly Sachs was born on the 10th of December in 1891 in Berlin, Germany, into a successful manufacturing family. She was educated at home due to her frail health and dreamt to be a dancer. At the age of 15, Nelly became enamored with the work of Swedish poet and author Selma Lagerlöf. The Nobel Prize winner, Lagerlöf entered into correspondence with Sachs, which allowed the quite shy Nelly to gain confidence on her writer's path. Thanks to the efforts of Selma Lagerlöf, Nelly and her mother managed to leave Germany in 1940. Then they lived in Stockholm in one-room apartment, and Nelly tried to make ends by translating German poetry into Swedish. After her mother's death, Sachs experienced several nervous breakdowns characterized by hallucinations and delusions of Nazi persecutions, so she spent a number of years in a mental institution. She continued to write poetry while hospitalized and eventually recovered sufficiently to live on her own. Anyway, her mental health remained fragile. There is an interesting story about one of her worst breakdowns. It was caused by hearing spoken German during the trip to Switzerland to accept a literary prize. So that is a story how even her mother tongue could do harm to her because it was associated with the Nazis and their persecution. Nelly Sachs was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1966. Whether Sachs' works are in poetic form or prose, in the aftermath of the Shoah, Sachs' poetry serves as a memorialization of Jewish suffering. Through the process of poetic engagement, witnessing creates a community through memorialization. Sachs' poetry undergoes a modernist change in style, meter, and form through the process of translating Swedish modernists such as Erik Lindegren, Gunnar Ekelhoff, and Johannes Edfeld. One poem of Nelly Sachs I want to represent you is O the Chimneys. The poem O the Chimneys is often viewed as her signature poem, as it encapsulates the body of Israel as a whole, documenting both individual and collective suffering. There is a short passage of the poem. O the chimneys, on the carefully planned dwellings of death, when Israel's body rose dissolved in smoke through the air, to be welcomed by a chimney sweep star, turned black. Or was it a ray of the sun? The star, probably the Star of David turning black, represents the play of light and darkness. In the end of the first stanza, it seems impossible for the speaker to decipher whether a sunbeam light itself is black or the star is. And one more passage. O the chimneys, paths of freedom for the dust of Jeremiah and Job, who dreamed you up and built stone upon stone. the path of smoke for their flight. Situating biblical figures into this Shoah context, as we saw previously with Dan Pagis' poetry, creates a space for collective Shoah memory to encapsulate the history of Israel's body in past, present, and future contexts. Jeremiah and Job become present in the death camps by their status as victims alongside Israel's body collective. The last line of the poem sounds as "and Israel's body dissolves in smoke through the air," which points the tragic end of the victims in crematoria. The last line serves as a refrain of testimony of the collective body of Israel, suspended as particles floating through the air. This musical refrain reinforces the communal act of memory. In 1966, Nelly Sachs wrote one of her works, Researchers. The terrible events that pushed me to the edge of death and darkness have been my teachers. If I had not been able to write, I would not have survived. Death was my teacher. With what else could I have occupied myself? My metaphors are my wound. So this is the experience of Nelly Sachs. We can say that the poetry of all the three poets shows the signs of traumatic realism. Traumatic realism in Holocaust poetry centers the importance of remembrance and memorialization while abbreviating how we are still grappling today to engage and connect with our past. Engaging the Shoah through the poetry of Dan Pagis, Paul Celan, and Nelly Sachs not only blends individual witnessing with public memorialization, but also demands a world of engagement in which readers see a bit closer. And here we have a quote by Elie Wiesel about Auschwitz. Auschwitz signifies not only the failure of 2000 years of Christian civilization, but also the defeat of the intellect that wants to find a meaning, with a capital M, in history. What Auschwitz embodied had none. I think surviving the Holocaust brought poetry to the new level of meaning and new level of expressing this meaning, what can be proven by the poetry represented in today's lecture. Thank you for your attention. Take care and see you during the next meetings of the cycle, The Course of Holocaust Literature.